The last thing Daniel Chávez remembered drinking was half a bottle of warm Gatorade sometime around noon. That was 4 hours ago. Now the bottle was empty. His lips were cracked down the middle like dry creek beds, and the sun, that enormous indifferent furnace, was still sitting high in the July sky like it had no intention of ever going down. He was 31 years old, a warehouse supervisor from Bakersfield, California. He was not an experienced hiker. He was not a survivalist. He was just a guy who had taken a week off work, watched one too many YouTube videos about Death Valley, and decided, for reasons he would later struggle to explain to the search and rescue team, that he could handle a solo day hike into Badwater Basin without a guide, without a proper map, and with less than 2 liters of water in his pack. The parking lot at Badwater had been full that morning. Families with kids in strollers. Tourists in flip-flops taking selfies next to the elevation sign that reads 282 feet below SEA level. A ranger in a tan uniform had been standing near the trailhead, and Daniel had deliberately walked past him without making eye contact. He didn't want to be told to turn around. He didn't want to lecture. He was a grown man. He'd done his research. What his research had failed to adequately communicate was this. The floor of Badwater Basin in July is not simply hot. It is a different category of experience altogether. The white salt flats reflect sunlight upward even as the sun beats down from above, meaning your body is being cooked from 2 directions simultaneously. The ground surface temperature that day was recorded at 201 degrees Fahrenheit. The air temperature at chest height was 127. There is no shade. There is no breeze. There is no mercy. Daniel had felt fine for the first mile. Even the second mile, he'd been okay. Sweating heavily, yes, but moving, feeling the strange alien beauty of the place, the way the salt crystals crunched under his boots like broken glass, the way the mountains in the distance shimmered and bent in a heat haze like they were made of liquid. He had taken photos. He had felt, briefly, like an explorer. By mile 3, something had shifted. It was subtle at first. A heaviness in his legs that hadn't been there before, a thickness behind his eyes. He drank the last of his first water bottle and told himself he was fine. He turned around at mile 4 as planned. What he had not planned for was the way the trail, barely a trail, really just faint boot prints in the salt, seemed to look exactly the same in every direction. What he had not planned for was the way the heat, by mid-afternoon, had become something physical, something with weight pressing down on his shoulders like a hand. He started walking faster. That was his first mistake. At mile 5, heading back toward the parking lot they could no longer see, Daniel Chávez finished his second and last water bottle. He was sweating so hard his shirt was completely soaked, dark and heavy against his skin. His heart was doing something strange, beating too fast, then skipping, then hammering again. He could feel in his ears. He checked his phone. No signal. He checked his GPS app. It was still loaded from when he'd had Wi-Fi at the motel. So the map worked, but the little blue that represented him was sitting in the middle of a vast white nothing, and the parking lot appeared to be 3.2 miles away. He said a word out loud that he would not repeat later in the presence of the search and rescue volunteers who saved his life. Then he put one boot in front of the other and kept walking, because what else was there to do? What Daniel did not know, what he had no way of knowing from the YouTube videos and the casual Googling he'd done in his motel room the night before, was that his body had already crossed a line. His core temperature, which should hover around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit in a healthy adult, had climbed to 102.4. Not dangerous yet, not technically, but he had no more water. The temperature was not dropping, and he had 3.2 miles of open salt flat between him and safety. The human body is an extraordinary machine. It can tolerate heat up to a point through sweating, a cooling system so efficient that in normal conditions, a healthy adult can survive temperatures that would kill most other mammals. But that system has one critical dependency: water. Without water, the sweat stops. When the sweat stops, the temperature climbs. And when the temperature climbs past a certain threshold, when it crosses from uncomfortable into dangerous, from dangerous into critical, from critical into the territory where proteins in your brain cells begin to literally cook, the machine does not slow down gracefully. It crashes. Daniel Chávez did not know any of this as he walked, head down, boots crunching on the salt. the sun pressing down on the back of his neck like a hot iron. He was thinking about his daughter, who was 7 years old and currently at her grandmother's house in Fresno. He was thinking about the air-conditioned car waiting for him in the parking lot, a silver Honda Civic with a half-drunk bottle of Sprite in the cup holder that he had, at the time of leaving, considered leaving behind because he didn't want it to get warm. He would have done a great deal right now for that warm Sprite. He walked. The salt crunched. The sun burned. And somewhere ahead of him, 3 miles away, then 2.5, then 2, a ranger named Sophia Reyes was climbing into her truck after a long shift, glancing out across the basin the way she always did before leaving, and noticing something that made her stop. A small dark shape out on the flats, moving slowly, too slowly. She reached for her radio. Sophia Reyes had been a park ranger at Death Valley National Park for 11 years. She had seen things out on those flats that most people never see and never want to. Hikers who'd passed out face down in the salt, their skin the color of a boiled lobster. A man who'd driven his car off the road and sat in the vehicle for 6 hours before flagging someone down, convinced a walk to the visitor center was probably not that far. A woman who'd removed her shoes because the heat radiating up through her sneaker soles had become unbearable and had burned the bottoms of her feet so badly she couldn't walk for 2 weeks. 11 years. She thought she'd seen every version of this story. She raised her binoculars. The shape on the flats was a man. He was moving, which was good, which meant he was conscious, but his gait was wrong. There's a particular way a person walks when their body is beginning to shut down from heat, and once you've seen it, you never forget it. It looks almost like drunk walking, but slower, more deliberate, like each step requires a separate, conscious decision, like the legs have started negotiating with the brain rather than simply obeying it. That's what she was looking at. She was already on the radio before she put the binoculars down. Dispatch, this is Reyes. I've got a possible heat emergency, Badwater Basin, approximately 2 miles south-southwest of the main lot. Single individual, on foot, moving erratically. I'm going in. The response crackled back. Copy that. Medical on standby. She put the truck in drive. What was happening inside Daniel Chávez's body at that moment was not dramatic in the way movies make it look. There was no sudden collapse, no cinematic fall. There was just a slow, creeping wrongness, a feeling like the world had been turned down slightly, the way you dim a light, everything a little less bright, a little less sharp, a little less real. His core temperature had reached 104.1 degrees Fahrenheit. At 104, the hypothalamus, the small region of the brain that acts as the body's thermostat, begins to lose its ability to regulate accurately. It keeps sending signals to sweat, but the sweat glands, starved of fluid, can barely respond. The cooling system is running on empty, spinning its wheels, generating heat through the effort trying to cool down without the resources to actually do it. His vision had developed a quality he'd never experienced before, a kind of pulsing at the edges, like the periphery of his sight was breathing. He'd read about heat mirages, so when he first saw the shimmer ahead of him, he assumed that's what it was, a trick of the light, water that wasn't there. He blinked. The shimmer didn't go away. He stopped walking. This, in retrospect, was the first good decision he made in several hours. Moving generates heat. The muscles in your legs, working to push you forward across difficult terrain in 127-degree air, produce tremendous amounts of thermal energy. That energy has to go somewhere, and when your body's cooling system is failing, it goes inward into your core, driving that number higher. By stopping, Daniel had, without knowing it, bought himself a little time. He stood in the middle of the salt flat, swaying slightly, and tried to think. The parking lot, the Honda, the Sprite. He started walking again, slower this time. The thing about heat stroke, true heat stroke, the life-threatening kind, not the milder heat exhaustion that responds to shade and water, is that it steals your ability to recognize itself. The brain, the very organ you need to make good decisions, is the first thing that starts to go. Confusion sets in. Judgment degrades. Patients who are interviewed after surviving severe heat stroke often describe a strange euphoria in the final stages before they lost consciousness, a floaty, disconnected feeling, almost pleasant, like being very drunk or very tired, like the world was softening around the edges. Daniel felt it now. He wasn't scared anymore. That was the frightening part. He'd been scared an hour ago, when he could still be scared, and now the fear had been replaced by something warmer and more comfortable, a kind of heavy calm. And he thought distantly that maybe he should sit down for a minute, just to rest his legs. The parking lot would still be there. He could rest and then keep going. That seemed reasonable. That seemed fine. He began to lower himself toward the ground. The horn hit him like a physical thing, a hard, flat blare cutting across the salt flats from his left, and he turned, blinking, and saw a truck, a white Park Service truck, bouncing hard across the uneven salt toward him, and a woman leaning out the window, one arm waving, and he thought, with the slow, underwater logic of a man whose brain temperature has reached 104.7 degrees Fahrenheit. A truck. Sophia had seen him start to sit down. She had pushed the accelerator to the floor. The Park Service truck was not designed for off-road salt flat travel at speed. It rattled and lurched and bottomed out twice in the space of 200 yards, and Sophia held the wheel with both hands and kept her eyes on the man who was now fully sitting down on the salt, knees up, head dropping forward, like a man falling asleep in a chair. She covered the distance in 40 seconds. She was out of the truck before it had fully stopped, emergency kit in hand. Radio clipped to her shoulder, running across the white salt in the full 127-degree heat that she, in her career, had learned to move through quickly and efficiently, because stopping meant absorbing it, and right now she didn't have time to absorb anything. She reached him and dropped to her knees. Sir, look at me." His eyes opened. They were glassy, the pupils slightly uneven, a detail that sent a cold spike of urgency through her despite the surrounding heat. "Hey!" His voice was thick, slow, the words arriving one at a time like they travel a long distance. "Is there parking here?" She had her thermometer out. She had her cold packs out. She was already on the radio calling the exact coordinates, already assessing, already running through the protocol she'd run through a dozen times before, but something was different this time. The thermometer reading, the pupil response, the particular shade of gray-red his skin had turned beneath his tan. Her voice, when she came back on the radio, was level and professional because that was what 11 years of training had built into her. But the word she used was not a word she used lightly. "Dispatch," she said. "I need that medical unit now. This one's critical." Sophia pulled him into the shade of the truck door, the only shade for 2 miles in any direction, and pressed a cold pack against the back of his neck. Then one under each armpit. Then one against his groin. These are the spots where major blood vessels run close to the surface, where cooling happens fastest, where you can actually move the needle on a core temperature that is climbing toward the point of no return. His skin was dry. That was the detail that scared her most. In the heat, a person should be soaked in sweat. Daniel's shirt was damp from earlier, but his skin itself, his arms, his neck, his forehead, was dry to the touch. His body had run out of fluid to sweat. The cooling system wasn't just struggling. It had stopped. She poured water over his head from her emergency supply, then over his arms. Then she opened the truck door wider and angled it to block the direct sun, and she kept talking to him. Kept his eyes open, because unconscious in the situation meant the clock moved faster and the math got worse. "What's your name?" "Daniel." "Daniel, how much water did you drink today?" A pause. "Too long. 2 bottles." "How big?" He held up his fingers. "Maybe 16 ounces each. Maybe less." She did the math without showing it on her face. A person sweats roughly 1 liter per hour in these conditions. He'd been out here for over 4 hours. He was running at a fluid deficit of somewhere between 2 and 3 liters. His blood had thickened. His heart was working harder than it should to push that thickened blood through vessels that were trying to dilate to release heat. His kidneys were beginning to struggle. The thermometer read 105.2. She got back on the radio. "Where's my medical unit?" 11 minutes out. 11 minutes. She looked at Daniel, who was staring at the salt flat with the expression of a man watching something very far away. His breathing had changed. Shallower, faster. The body tried to offload heat through respiration the way a dog pants. She had 1 more cold pack left. She pressed it against his chest, directly over his heart. "Daniel, look at me. What's your daughter's name?" He blinked, turned slowly. "Maya." "How old is Maya?" "7. A pause. "She likes dinosaurs." "That's great. Tell me about that." Keep him talking. Keep him present. Keep that brain, which was currently being cooked from the inside, engaged enough to stay conscious. Unconscious patients lose their airway. They aspirate. They stop being a heat emergency and start being something worse. He talked about Maya. He talked slowly, with long gaps between sentences, but he talked. She kept applying water. She kept the cold packs moving. They warm up fast in 127-degree air, and once they're warm, they're useless. So she rotated them, pressing each one against a different vessel point, buying fractions of a degree at a time. At minute 4, he stopped mid-sentence. "Daniel." "Nothing." "Daniel." She snapped her fingers in front of his face. His eyes were open but had gone somewhere else. Not closed, open, just absent. The lights were on, but the signal had dropped. She grabbed his shoulder and shook once hard, and he blinked and came back, but slower this time, like swimming up from deeper water. 105.6. She'd seen 106 twice in her career. Both patients had survived. One had permanent kidney damage. The other had spent 3 weeks in the ICU and was never quite the same. She'd seen 107 once. That one hadn't made it to the hospital. She poured the last of her water over his head and neck, pulled off her own ranger hat and used it to fan him, which felt inadequate and was inadequate. But inadequate was better than nothing, and right now nothing was the only other option. Her radio crackled. "Reyes, medical unit is 6 minutes out. Can the patient walk to the lot?" She looked at Daniel, who had listed sideways against the truck door and was making no effort to correct himself. "Negative. Come to us. I'll pop a flare." She pulled a flare from her kit, cracked it, set on the salt 10 yards out from the truck. A hard red light in all that white and beige, a signal visible from half a mile. Then she went back to Daniel and kept going. Water, cold packs, rotation, talk. "Daniel, stay with me." He said something she didn't catch. She leaned closer. "The Sprite," he said. "In the car." "Yeah," she said. "You're going to get that Sprite. But you have to stay awake. Can you do that?" No answer. She checked his pulse. Fast, thin, thready. The pulse of a heart that's running low on fuel and working too hard for what it's getting. She tilted his chin up slightly to open his airway and made a decision. If he lost consciousness fully before the unit arrived, she was going to start CPR protocol regardless, because a heart running this hot and this hard could go into arrhythmia without warning. In the distance, she heard it, the crunch of tires on salt. Fast. She stood up and waved. The medical unit, a white van with 2 paramedics named Garrett and Lynn, came in hard and stopped 10 feet away. Garrett was out with a stretcher before Lynn had killed the engine. They moved the way people move when they've done this many times before, without wasted motion, without speaking more than necessary. Garrett took one look at Daniel and said, "Temperature?" Last read was 105.6. That was 90 seconds ago. 4. Couldn't establish. No equipment. He was already on his knees with the kit open. Cold forcilline, chilled in the medical van's refrigerated storage, is one of the most effective interventions for heat stroke. It cools from the inside. It restores blood volume. It gives the heart something to work with. Lynn had the bag ready before Garrett had the tourniquet on. The needle went in on the first try. Daniel flinched, which meant he felt it, which meant some part of him was still responding. That was something. "Let's move him," Garrett said. They lifted him onto the stretcher. His body was heavy in a way unconscious or near unconscious bodies are always heavy. No cooperation, no resistance, just dead weight and heat. They loaded him into the van. The van doors closed. The AC, set to maximum cold, hit Daniel's skin. Garrett called the hospital. Incoming heat stroke, adult male, approximately 30, core temp 105 plus, altered consciousness for saline running. ETA 14 minutes. Get the ice bath ready. Sophia stood next to her truck in the 127-degree heat and watched the medical van go. Then she picked up her radio and started the paperwork, because that was how this worked. The crisis moved on, and you stayed behind and documented it. She didn't know yet if Daniel Chávez was going to live. She picked up the empty cold packs from the salt and put them in a trash bag and got back in her truck. And she drove. Valley Medical Center in Ridgecrest is a small hospital, 32 beds, 1 trauma bay, staff who deal with heat emergencies every summer the way ER doctors in other parts of the country deal with flu season, routinely, efficiently, without drama, because drama takes time and time is what these patients don't have. Dr. Amaro Osei had the ice bath ready. When the van pulled in, it's not a complicated setup. A gurney-sized tub filled with ice water kept at 35 degrees Fahrenheit. You put the patient in. You monitor. You wait for the temperature to drop. It works faster than any other field-available method. Faster than cold forlorn. Faster than ice packs. Faster than cooling blankets. The physics are simple. Water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. Put a person whose core is at 106 degrees into 35-degree water, and the heat moves. Fast. The problem is the patient has to survive long enough to get there. The van doors opened. Garrett jumped out first and gave the handoff in 30 seconds flat. Temperature on arrival 105.6. Current read after 14 minutes of cold 4 and van AC was 105.1. Patient semi-conscious, responding to pain stimulus. Heart rate 134 and irregular. Irregular was the word that moved Dr. Osei faster. The heart muscle, like all muscle, is made of protein. Protein denatures, breaks down, loses its structure at sustained high temperatures. The hotter the core, the longer it stays hot, the more the heart muscle itself begins to be affected. An irregular heartbeat in a heat stroke patient isn't just a complication. It's the door that leads to the room where people die. They moved Daniel from the stretcher to the tub in under a minute. The cold hit him like a switch being thrown. His whole body contracted. Every muscle simultaneously. A full body flinch that lifted his back off the bottom of the tub. His eyes snapped open, fully open, and for the first time in over an hour, he was completely present. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at Dr. Osei leaning over him. He said one word. Cold. "I know," she said. "Leave it." He tried to sit up. 2 nurses held him down, not roughly but firmly. This is standard. The instinct when submerged in ice water is to get out. The instinct is wrong. You stay until the temperature drops, and you don't negotiate with the patient about it. He fought for about 30 seconds. Then something went out of him, and he stopped fighting and lay back and stared at the ceiling with his jaw clenched and his hands gripping the sides of the tub hard enough that his knuckles went white. Dr. Osei watched the thermometer. It was rectal, the only accurate measure of core temperature in a situation like this, because skin temperature in an ice bath means nothing. She needed the core number. She watched it, 105.1, then 104.8, then 104.3, moving in the right direction. Not fast enough. She ordered a second bag of cold saline. She ordered a urinalysis. She needed to know what his kidneys were doing, whether the reduced blood flow during the crisis had caused damage, whether there was myoglobin in the urine, which would tell her his muscle tissue had started breaking down. She ordered a full cardiac panel. Then she did what doctors in small trauma bays do when they've set everything in motion and are waiting for results. She stood at the side of the tub and watched her patient and thought. Daniel Chávez had been found at approximately 4:20 p.m. The temperature at that time was 127 degrees Fahrenheit, based on his account. 2 16-ounce water bottles for a 4+ hour hike. He had been running a severe fluid deficit for at least 2 hours before the ranger found him. His core temperature on arrival at the tub was, accounting for the partial cooling in the van, probably somewhere around 106 when he was pulled off the salt flat. At 106 degrees Fahrenheit, the blood-brain barrier begins to break down. Proteins in brain cells denature. Neurons that die from heat do not regenerate. The damage is not like the damage from a blow to the head, which can heal. Heat damage to the brain is permanent. At 107, the liver begins to fail. At 108, you are in the territory where, statistically, More patients die than survive, and the ones who survive often do so with lasting organ damage. He had been, by her estimate, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes from 107 when the ranger found him. She didn't say this out loud. There was no reason to say out loud yet. She filed in the part of her brain where she kept things that mattered but didn't help anyone right now, and she watched the thermometer. 103.9. His jaw unclenched slightly. The grip on the sides of the tub loosened a fraction. 103.4. At 103, she would move him out of the ice bath. You don't cool a heat stroke patient all the way to normal. You stop at 103 and let the body do the rest. Because overcooling creates its own problems. Send the heart into a different kind of crisis. The target is 103. Then monitoring. Then waiting to see what the blood work shows. 103.1. She gave the order. They lifted him out, wrapped him in blankets, not warm blankets, room temperature, and moved him to the trauma bed. He was shivering now, hard, full body shivering, which looked alarming but was actually a good sign. Shivering meant the hypothalamus was back online, the thermostat was functioning, the brain was talking to the body again. He was awake, fully awake. He looked at Dr. Osei and said, in a voice that was rough and small and very tired, "Am I okay?" She gave him the answer she gave all of them at this stage, the honest answer that was also the only useful answer. "You're stable. We're going to run some tests, and then we'll know more." What she knew already was this. His cardiac panel came back 20 minutes later with elevated troponin levels, indicating the heart muscle had been stressed. His urine was dark. Not the darkest she'd seen, but dark enough to indicate the kidneys had taken a hit. His liver enzymes were elevated. These were the numbers of a body that had been close to the edge and pulled back, but not without cost. She went to find a phone. There was a woman in Fresno, a 7-year-old girl who liked dinosaurs, who needed to know that her father was going to be okay. Mostly. That was the part Dr. Osei left out of the phone call. The word mostly. The asterisk that comes after every survival story. The fine print that says, he lived, and that's true, and that matters. But living and walking away clean are not always the same thing. His heart would need monitoring for weeks. His kidneys would need follow-up. There was a cognitive assessment scheduled for the following morning, a standard battery of tests designed to catch the thing nobody wanted to name directly. The possibility that the heat had taken something from his brain that wasn't coming back. He lay in the trauma bay with an 4 in each arm and a cardiac monitor beeping steadily beside him, and the blankets pulled up to his chin despite the fact that it was 94 degrees outside, and he was shivering, and he was alive. In the parking lot, in a silver Honda Civic, a bottle of Sprite sat in the cup holder. By now it was completely flat. Daniel Chávez spent 4 days in Valley Medical Center. The first day he slept 16 hours. The second day he was well enough to eat, badly enough to need help walking to the bathroom. The third day the cognitive assessment came back clean, no measurable neurological damage, which Dr. Osei described him with the specific controlled relief of someone who had prepared for a different outcome. The fourth day his kidney function had returned to normal range. His cardiac enzymes had dropped, and the doctor signed his discharge papers. His sister drove from Bakersfield to pick him up. She did not say much on the drive home. She didn't have to. Maya was waiting at the house. That part of the story Daniel has told in interviews since. There have been a few, local news, one podcast, and he always stops at that part and takes a second. 7 years old, standing in the driveway in a T-shirt with a Triceratops on it, and he got out of the car and she ran at him and he caught her and held on, and that was the part that made everything before it real in a way that the ice bath and the cardiac monitor hadn't quite managed. The brush with death becomes real for most survivors, not in the moment of crisis, but afterward, in the ordinary moments. The cup of coffee, the kid in the driveway, the flat Sprite that his sister found in the Honda and poured down the sink without thinking about it, and which Daniel, when she told him, felt a strange, brief grief about that he couldn't fully explain. 3 months later, his follow-up blood work was normal. The cardiologist cleared him without restrictions. The nephrologist said his kidneys showed no lasting damage. He went back to work at the warehouse. He coached Maya's soccer team that fall. By November, he looked, to anyone who didn't know, like a man who had never come within 45 minutes of dying on a salt flat in the California desert. But he knew. He knew it the way people who have been that close always know. Not constantly, not every minute, but in moments. When it's hot, when he's outside and the sun is direct and strong, and he feels the first edge of real heat on the back of his neck. Something in him registers it differently now. Not panic, just awareness. A recalibration of what heat actually is and what it can actually do. Purchase at a price he got lucky enough to pay and walk away from. He does not hike alone anymore. He carries more water than he thinks he needs. He checks the temperature before he goes anywhere that doesn't have shade. These sound like small things. They are small things. They are also the exact things that would have prevented everything that happened to him on that salt flat in July. And he knows that too. Now here's what the story of Daniel Chávez actually teaches. Not the dramatic version, not the Hollywood version, but the version that matters if you ever find yourself somewhere hot and far from help. Rule 1. The water math is not what you think it is. Most people, when they think about carrying water for a hike, think in terms of the whole trip. Bring enough to last. What they don't account for is rate. In temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, a healthy adult loses between 1 and 1.5 liters of sweat per hour during moderate physical activity. Daniel hiked for over 4 hours and carried roughly 1 liter total. He was short by 3 liters before he even turned around. The rule in extreme heat is not bring enough water. The rule is bring more than you think is physically possible to drink, because the desert will find the gap between what you brought and what you needed, and it will use that gap against you. 1 liter per hour minimum. In Death Valley in July, experienced guides say 1.5. Not per day, per hour. Rule 2, by the time you feel bad, you're already behind. Thirst is not an early warning system. It is a late warning system. When your brain registers thirst and sends a signal that makes you reach for your bottle, your body is already operating at a fluid deficit. In normal conditions, this doesn't matter much. You drink, you catch up. In extreme heat, during heavy exertion, you cannot drink fast enough to fully catch up once you fall behind. The protocol used by military units operating in desert environments is to drink on a schedule, not on demand, every 15 to 20 minutes, regardless of whether you feel thirsty. Small amounts, consistently, before the deficit opens up. Daniel felt fine for the first 2 miles. He felt fine right up until the point where he didn't. And by then the window for self-rescue had already narrowed considerably. Fine is not information. Fine is just the absence of symptoms, and symptoms in heat arrive late. Rule 3. Stop moving before you have to. This one is counterintuitive. When you're in trouble and help is not close, every instinct says move, get to safety, cover ground, keep going. In cold environments, movement keeps you alive. It generates heat. It gets you to shelter faster. It fights hypothermia. In extreme heat, movement is the enemy. Every step your legs take generates thermal energy that your body has to manage. When your cooling system is already failing, that extra heat load is the thing that pushes your core temperature from dangerous to fatal. The correct play, when you're lost or in distress in extreme heat and you cannot immediately reach safety, is to stop. Find the largest shadow available, a rock, a ridge, a parked vehicle, anything. Get horizontal if possible, because standing keeps more of your body's surface in direct sun. Signal for help. Wait, Daniel did not know this. He kept walking fast at one point. If Sophia Reyes had not spotted him when she did, if she had left 5 minutes earlier, if she had been looking the other direction, Daniel would have sat down on that salt flat and within 20 minutes would have been unconscious. Unconscious in 127-degree heat, 2 miles from the parking lot, in a location nobody knew to look. The Park Service recovered his car at 8 p.m. that night. Under their standard protocol, they would have begun an active search by 9. They would almost certainly have found him. Almost certainly is not the same as certainly, and found him is not the same as found him in time. He got lucky. He got a ranger who looked left instead of right. He got an 11-minute response time, and a code 4, and a doctor who had the ice bath ready before the van pulled in. He got Maya in the driveway in the Triceratops shirt. Most of the variables that kept Daniel Chávez alive were not under his control. The ranger, the response time, the hospital proximity. These things broke his way. The variables that almost killed him were entirely under his control. the amount of water he packed, the time of day he chose to hike, the decision to wave off the ranger at the trailhead rather than ask one question. Is this a good idea today? That question cost nothing. In Death Valley in July, the answer would have been no. The answer is almost always no. This is Heat Limit. Every story we tell happened. Every number is real. The people survived, some of them, and the ones who didn't left behind the same lesson. The ones who did are still trying to explain. Next episode, a construction crew in Dubai. 52 degrees Celsius. One water truck for 40 men. And a foreman who made a decision that saved half of them and couldn't save the rest. Subscribe. This information is free. Ignorance out there is not.